Good evening, everyone. I am probably flying solo tonight. Let me just put a greeting on the chat for YouTube, and I will begin. What I'm going to do is, in 1 hour, I'm going to be reading part 2 of the structure of the unconscious by C.G. Jung, which is in the appendix of 2 essays on analytical psychology. And Jordan will not be joining me tonight because it is Halloween and he has to work in the square in Taos, New Mexico, where he works in the square. And so he does great tarot readings there, and he's excellent at it. So anyway, I will be relying on the YouTube chat. I'm monitoring the YouTube chat. I'm relying on the YouTube chat to push me along here, ask questions, say whatever you want, and we'll keep this going. So I'm at paragraph 451 of this book, 2 essays on analytical psychology by C.G. Jung, and it's on page 273. And the title of this section, as I said, is Phenomena Resulting from the Assimilation of the Unconscious. The process of assimilating the unconscious gives rise to some very remarkable phenomena. It produces in some patients an unmistakable and often unpleasant increase of self-confidence and conceit. They're full of themselves. They know everything. They imagine themselves to be fully informed of everything concerning their unconscious and are persuaded that they understand perfectly everything that comes out of it. At every interview with the doctor, they get more and more above themselves. Others, on the contrary, feel themselves more and more crushed under the contents of the unconscious. They lose their self-confidence and abandon themselves with dull resignation to all the extraordinary things that the unconscious produces. The former, overflowing with feelings of their own importance, assume a responsibility for the unconscious that goes much too far, beyond all reasonable bounds. The others finally give up all sense of responsibility, overcome by a sense of powerlessness of the ego against the fate working through the unconscious. Okay, what I would say here is that Dr. Jung often related things that happened for unconscious reasons as twists of fate in his thinking. Yeah, good evening, Justin. Nice to see you tonight. I'm going to keep going here. If we analyze these two modes of reaction more deeply, we find that the optimistic self-confidence of the first conceals a profound sense of impotence, for which their conscious optimism acts as an unsuccessful compensation, while the pessimistic resignation of the others masks a defiant will to power, far surpassing in cocksureness the conscious optimism of the first type. Paragraph 453. Adler has employed the term godlikeness to characterize certain basic features of neurotic power psychology. If I likewise borrow the same term from Faust, I use it here more in the sense that well-known passage where Mephisto writes, quote, Eritus sicut Deus scientis bonum et malum in the student's album, and makes the following aside. And this is from part 3, third scene in Goethe's Faust. Quote, just follow the old advice of my cousin the snake. There'll come a time when your godlikeness will make you quiver and quake. Okay, that's the quote. Paragraph 454. Godlikeness is certainly not a scientific concept, although it aptly characterizes the psychological state in question. It has yet to be seen whence this attitude arises and why it deserves the name of godlikeness. As the term indicates, the abnormality of the patient's condition consists in his attributing to himself qualities or values which obviously do not belong to him. For to be godlike is to be like a spirit superior to the spirit of man. Paragraph 455. If with a psychological aim in view we dissect this notion of godlikeness, we find that the term comprises not only the dynamic phenomenon I've discussed in my book on libido, but also a certain psychic function having a collective character superordinate to the individual mentality. Just as the individual is not merely a unique and separate being, but is also a social being, so the human mind is not a self-contained and wholly individual phenomenon, but also a collective one. And just as certain social functions or instincts are opposed to the egocentric instincts or egocentric interests of the individual, so certain functions or tendencies of the human mind are opposed by their collective nature to the personal mental functions. There's a footnote. This conflict arises, for instance, when it is a question of subordinating personal desires or opinions to social laws. For example, Rousseau in Emile, Book 1, quote, what can one do when instead of educating a man for himself, people want to educate him for others? Harmony is then impossible. Obliged to fight either against nature or against the social institutions, one has to choose between making a man or a citizen, for one cannot make the one and the other at the same time. The reason for this is that every man is born with a brain that is highly differentiated. This makes him capable of a wide range of mental functioning, which is neither developed ontogenetically nor acquired, but inasmuch as human brains are uniformly differentiated, the mental functioning thereby made possible is collective and universal. This explains, for example, the interesting fact that the unconscious processes of the most widely separated peoples and races show a quite remarkable correspondence, which displays itself, among other things, in the extraordinary but well-authenticated analogies between the forms and motifs of autochthonous myths. Okay, so what he's saying here is that the myths are the same, just in your case and mine, you live in Denmark and I live in the United States, but we think a lot in many, think alike in many ways. But I still think of myself as an American, and I presume that you still think of yourself as a Dane. And one of the reasons that we take 5 years to naturalize a U.S. citizen, somebody who comes to the United States for the purpose of becoming an American, is because that is the accepted period of time it takes for someone to start thinking of themselves as an American, as opposed to thinking of themselves as a Dane. Paragraph 456, the universal similarity of human brains leads to the universal possibility of a uniform mental functioning. This functioning is the collective psyche. This can be subdivided into the collective mind and the collective soul, inasmuch as there are differentiations corresponding to race, tribe, and even family. There's also a collective psyche limited to race, tribe, and family over and above the universal collective psyche. And there's a footnote 7 here. By the collective mind, I mean collective thinking. By the collective soul, collective feeling. And by the collective psyche, the collective psychological functioning as a whole. Good evening, Miles. Nice to see you this evening. Okay, to borrow an expression from Pierre Genet, the collective psyche comprises the partie inferior of the mental functions, that is to say, those deep-rooted, well-nigh automatic portions of the individual psyche which are inherited and are to be found everywhere and are thus impersonal or supra-personal. That means supra means under-personal. Consciousness plus the personal unconscious constitutes the partie superior of the mental functions. I'm sure you can laugh at my pronunciation of the French, of the mental functions, those portions, therefore, that are developed ontogenetically and acquired as a result of personal differentiation. Okay, so we know that we are very much like other races, nationalities, and we're actually only, I think, 1.5% different from the great apes, but that's a different topic. Art says, hi, Skip, hope you are doing well. Thank you, Art. I hope you are doing well, too. I am working hard as a substitute teacher right now, although it looks like somebody may pick me up for a permanent job as a teacher. I came to the end of my, or at least the temporary end of my rope, and have to make ends meet. So at 76 years old, I have to go back to work. And the irony of that is that I haven't had a 9-to-5 job, and in this there's 7:20 to 3 o'clock jobs. If I do elementary school, I haven't had a regular job where I had to meet hours since 1989, if you can believe that. It's been a long time. So actually, it's not bothering me too much so far, but okay, going on. 457, consequently, the individual who annexes the unconscious heritage of the collective psyche to what has accrued to him in the course of his ontogenetic development enlarges the scope of his personality in an illegitimate way and suffers the consequences. Insofar as the collective psyche comprises the partie inferior of the mental functions and thus forms the basis of every personality, it has the effect of crushing and devaluing the latter. This shows itself in the aforementioned stifling of self-confidence and in an unconscious heightening of the ego's importance to the point of pathological will to power. On the other hand, insofar as the collective psyche is superordinate to the personality, what being the matrix of all personal differentiations and the mental function common to all individuals, it will have the effect, if annexed to the personality, of producing a hypertrophy of self-confidence, which in turn is compensated by an extraordinary sense of inferiority in the unconscious. I had an interesting experience today. I had 10th graders that I was substituting for in social studies, and they'd been given an assignment for the day to work on. There were a group of boys who thought that they were above the fray and didn't have to do the work. So I pulled a stool over next to them and just sat next to them until they started to do the work. But there was still one boy who was basically refusing to do the work, was refusing to turn off his cell phone and his computer. And so I moved over to right above him, and I sat next to him for the next 45 minutes. Well, he was a very tough kid, and he kept being very insistent that he didn't have to do the work. And I just sat there and just watched him. And he thought that he could basically stare me down and get me to move away, which I didn't. And at the end, I just said, "You think you're tougher than me? Let me tell you, Sonny, I was 23 years in the U.S. Marines. You're not tougher than I am. What have you done?" And so, okay, 458. If through assimilation of the unconscious, we make the mistake of including the collective psyche in the inventory of personal mental functions, a dissolution of the personality into its paired opposites inevitably follows. Besides the pair of opposites already discussed, megalomania and the sense of inferiority, which are so painfully evident in neurosis, there are many others from which I will single out only the specifically moral pair of opposites, namely good and evil, scientes bonum et malum. Jewel has joined me. Good evening, Jewel. Nice to see you tonight.
I don't know why my camera's not on, but it's not.
I don't know either.
You can hear me, right?
I can hear you. Yes, I can.
Okay. I was listening to you on something else. I'm going to turn it off right now.
Okay.
Just got in from work. Mine is a non-traditional job like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Life took me in different directions. And so, but before that, as I was settling in, you read something earlier that talked about the institutions that teach us things. And and I'm thinking, you're still in on, let me get you off of my other device because you'll hear us in the background. Okay. And what I was looking for was my text, but I can't find it right now. So I'm going to let you know that. But it was talking about institutions teach us what they want us to teach.
Yep.
And times where you lived, well, and you were talking about substitute teaching, and I have done that also. And I was with somebody that does work like I do. She's older, and we were a different era when if women didn't go to college, they didn't get a good job. So I decided I was going to go to college. It took me 10 years to get it. And then as things changed, I wanted to teach in school. And then I was invited to teach at a community college, and they said, go ahead and get your master's now because education's requiring that higher degree. And in the next process, had a child who at that time had diabetes, which was she had a very, very severe case of it. And she never went 2 weeks without going unconscious for many, many, many years. So therefore, substitute talk. So back to where we were, and you were talking about being at school with that young man who had a cell. I'm going back to what you talk about. Why are the schools letting them have cell phones in class? Why?
Well, the parents are now insisting on it because of all these shootings and stuff. Every parent wants their child, if at least in middle school and above, to have a telephone, and a lot of elementary school kids have them. And And, if the school system tries to stop that, then they immediately get accused of risking the children. So you can't do that. But I learned today, because I was working with a co-teacher who has been in the same school for 24 years, and who is quite experienced in these things. He said, if he refuses to turn off the cell phone, you can send him to the office. Now, what that means is that in our school system, I think you can be sent to the office 3 times and then you get suspended. Okay, which means that you have to go home for like 5 days. And obviously that doesn't make your parents very happy with you. And I think, I don't know in my school system right now because I'm too new at it, but in my old school system, if you were suspended twice, you got expelled. And then you had to find another school to go to that would accept you, an expelled student. And parents would get citations for truancy for their children. And so that's obviously very unpopular among parents. and so the children straighten up. Now, in my case, because I was only in this particular class for 4 days, and actually this particular one I was only in for 1 day, I do try to avoid sending young people to the office. Because I feel like, I can take a certain amount of chaos. I joked to one teacher, because in some of the younger students in art classes, the kids just get very loud and noisy, and mostly I just tolerate it. And I said to the teacher, compared to being in combat with the Marines, this is kindergarten stuff. So I just let them go at it. But I do quiet them down every so often to try to give a direction here or there, especially in art, because I'm trying to get them to produce a finished work of art in 30 to 50 minutes, typically. And this class today was a social studies class. So the teacher had put together an assignment to be done in class because she wasn't going to be there. And I felt it's my duty to try to get people to do the assignment. So ultimately, this young man that I sat next to for the whole period on a stool, I had to sit on a stool, which, given my age and the fact that I have 3 joint replacements, is not very comfortable, including a replaced hip. So it's not very comfortable for me to sit on a stool. But I do it because I'm tough enough to do it. And I just stared at this young man and finally started to do the work. And, I hope it was a lesson for him. I don't know if it is, but I have found that it's very helpful to tell a class something about myself so that they relate to me in more of a human way. And I'm still experimenting about when to tell them something about myself. Unfortunately, this class today, I only had 1 time, so it wasn't very conducive to that. But I'm trying to figure it out. Meanwhile, I got asked again tonight for a interview for a permanent social studies position, and And I had one a week ago. I have heard nothing. Okay, the way the school system does it is they have the principals do the interview, okay, and the department chair, and then they make the recommendation to the central office, but you don't know what their recommendation is. It's just silence, and then finally you might get an offer from someplace. And so at the moment, I'm sort of waiting for an offer. Of course, because I have a doctoral level degree, I'm a little bit more expensive based on the pardon?
The pay scale, yes.
On the pay scale, I'm more expensive than your average teacher, and so, you know, who knows what considerations are going into these things. But it's quite obvious that they're short teachers. In fact, the paper today said the school district is still short 199 teachers, and even more, 205 food service workers, people to work for the lunchtime, and they're still short 67 bus drivers this year. And so that is causing chaos because they can't get kids into school, or they're making parents drive, and obviously that's very unpopular. You know, meanwhile, they've been screwing people down on salary for 50 years in school teaching, and so the result is they just can't get anybody that's willing to do it. I mean, obviously, there are a lot of people that are my age that are capable of doing it and could do it, but why should they go out for basically minimum wage, or not even? You know, when I do a gig all day for $100, it's a 10-hour day at least for me. And
yes.
Pardon?
Yes. Yeah, I want to add to that when you finish.
All right, go ahead.
Well, what I'm seeing, hearing from you, is that the government, when talking about institutions, and this is back to political, whatever we're headed towards, and the environment I grew up in was very uneducated. My dad had a ninth grade degree, ninth grade, high school degree if you finished ninth. Then I found out Dad was an alcoholic, and I knew we didn't visit much. And you know me, I'm a 12-step person, and it was the 12 steps I learned how to live real life.
Yeah.
And what I did today is I called a school, a very poor one in this area that I live in Flat Rock, North Carolina, which Flat Rock's a very affluent town, Henderson County, Carolina, very affluent, and wanted to work with those kids that were the poorest because of my background. I understood them. They speak a second language. Some of them do. I don't have that. But I did study Spanish, so I could catch up with them a little bit.
Sure.
But it takes me back to what we're taught. And this goes back to the parents have been taught you can't trust the schools. The schools have been taught you can't, back to me and my age, we don't pay, women aren't required this, we then require this, we raise the bar. This is all across the board in society. We don't like it, rebel. And this is where, back when I was substitute teaching in Mecklenburg County, the largest school in North Carolina, if there was a problem at school, that school already had in place a system. They rang the parents immediately. Now this, we have the tail wagging the dog. I think, I don't know about the school system, I'm just speaking my personal experience, and I learned that in 12-step program because they can all be different, not judging any, but until we have open communication to learn from each other, and that's where I'm going.
I'm not seeing that yet in our school district, where it remains to be seen though, because we have a new a new superintendent. He happens to be Black. His previous job was in Kansas City. And today in the newspaper, he said that his average pay in his Kansas City school district was up at $15.50 an hour, but that in my county, which is a very affluent county in Maryland, it's the home of the capital of the state of Maryland, Annapolis, the average pay scale he's got is $10.50. Okay, now I don't know that he was including teachers in that, but that's awfully low when I realized that at my local Dunkin' Donuts shop, they have a sign out in front of Dunkin' Donuts saying we're hiring $16 an hour. That means that employers are desperate to hire people because they're just not coming to work because they've been screwed down by, well, I won't say for political reasons, I won't say which party. Okay.
I will say political, and I will say political who's taking care of big business and institutions. That's
absolutely.
And I did get my degree in accounting. I love taxes, and I'm following taxes law. And I'll have to go back, check your states. Institutions can take mortgage interest off on property.
Yep.
Property owners cannot. So that's where institutions are taken care of and not the other. I don't want to go that way. I'll get upset and then blah, blah, blah. So tell me more what what's where I'm pulling on and bringing to the present day, applying to me what he was talking about. And because of my experience now, I'm seeing it very deep. But
Yep.
I will add one other thing. When I heard that, when I go into the schools, I was making $54 an hour, a day.
A day.
A day for a bachelor's degree. Again, it was females going in at that point in time. Now they're getting the older generation who have life experience.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to go back and pay that forward. And for me, that's why I'm going into that school. And I will say the school I was at, they mixed the richest kids in the neighborhood and one neighborhood and bust out the inner city kids who were poor. And I just loved them. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, that's where I made the difference because I loved them irregardless.
Well, that's a good way to do it. And I hope that it works for me too, as I have more time with students. So far I typically have like a day with them. In this school I was at last week and today, I was with a different section for 3 classes, but with this section today, only 1. And so it's hard to make a big impact when you're only seeing kids for half an hour or an hour.
I'm going to interrupt you. Do not
Sure.
discount yourself for that way. When you mentioned to him your background and you sat there one-on-one male, that was the gift that you gave.
Well, I hope so. And I've been learning that, and I've been focusing on the tough cases, like when they want the attendance sent down to the office every hour, right? And typically what happens is some very stuck-up girl will say, I want to go to the office. I want to go for you. They're all volunteers. And I never pick them anymore. I only pick, the teachers will leave behind for me notes that say, well, so-and-so is a trusted student in this class. And I want to go to the untrusted student and give them a responsibility to do something that they have to do. And, so far it's worked out quite well.
It did for me too. And I had a situation, I won't tell you now, but I will say that they thought he was a rough kid and a leader of a group. And he became my best friend. And that's because they were treated right. So I want to see what Carl Jung's going to lead us into next.
Okay, well, let's go on. So I'll start reading again. I do want to get through, and I'm going to wrap this up at 9. So I have 4 more pages that I want to read, and we can comment on them. Okay, so paragraph 458. If through assimilation of the unconscious, we make the mistake of including the collective psyche in the inventory of personal mental functions, a dissolution of the personality into its paired opposites inevitably follows. So we see that dissolution into paired opposites in our country right now in current affairs, where people think, if you're bad, if you're blue, you're bad. If you're red, you're bad. And vice versa. That's obviously exactly where the collective psyche has gotten a hold of us, and we have to withdraw our society from that attitude so that everybody has an attitude that they want to learn and so on.
And I will say what you just did in the class is what I had done when I was a substitute. I found somebody that I trusted, that I was given them an opportunity, which were the opposites of what we to do. But when they performed in class as reasonable people who may not be whatever, according to what our government's, our school system and all has been teaching these kids to be prejudiced towards by whatever. And I'm not talking color, I'm talking class, I'm talking all kinds of stuff, silly stuff. And that goes to personal preference too. But that's why I was wanting you to continue talking, because we took opposites, what society saw as opposites, and saw the beauty of the soul.
Well, yeah. And my father kind of taught me this lesson when I was in the 4th grade. I was in this country school, and we had 3 classes in my room. Okay, so the country school had 2 rooms, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade upstairs, and kindergarten through 3rd grade downstairs, 2 teachers. And boy, what a handful they had. And so like my 4th grade only had four students, and my 5th grade had 6 or something, right? When I stepped up to 5th grade. But when I was in the 4th grade, there was one drinking fountain in the room, and we were given a certain time that we could get lined up to go to the drinking fountain. And this farm kid, who was a year older than me, was kind of bullying me. And so I mentioned it to my father, and he says, well, just remember, a hard-boiled egg is always yellow inside. And so the next day when he bullied me, I just said, I said that a hard-boiled egg is always yellow inside. And after that, we became fast friends, believe it or not.
That was lessons in life that you can't learn unless you've got the teacher. Your dad, you, and you're modeling for these kids. Keep it up, and I want to hear more about Carl.
Yeah, okay, so going on. Besides the pair of opposites already discussed, megalomania and the sense of inferiority, which are so painfully evident in neurosis, there are many others, from which I will single out only the specifically moral pair of opposites, namely good and evil. The formation of this pair goes hand in hand with the increase in diminution of self-confidence. The specific virtues and vices of humanity are contained in the collective psyche, like everything else. One man arrogates collective virtue to himself as his personal merit. Another takes collective vice as his personal guilt. Both are as illusory as the megalomania and the inferiority, because the imaginary virtues and the imaginary wickedness are simply the moral pair of opposites contained in the collective psyche, which have become perceptible or have been rendered conscious artificially. how much these paired opposites are contained in the collective psyche is exemplified by primitives. One observer will extol the greatest virtues in them, while another will record the very worst impressions of the selfsame tribe. For the primitive, whose personal differentiation is, as we know, only just beginning, both judgments are true, because his mentality is essentially collective. He is still more or less identical with the collective psyche, and for that reason, shares equally in the collective virtues and vices without any personal attribution and without inner contradictions. The contradiction arises only when the personal development of the mind begins and when reason discovers the irreconcilable nature of the opposites. The consequence of this discovery is the conflict of repression. We want to be good and therefore must repress evil. And with that, the paradise of the collective psyche comes to an end. Okay, so this is kind of what's happened to us in our current affairs right now, where our former president just, dissed every norm that anybody ever had and just said, I don't have to follow that rule. I don't have to follow that rule. And so all of a sudden we've got a lot of people that are saying, oh, wait a minute, if he doesn't have to follow the rule, then I don't have to follow the rule. And pretty soon you've got society split in two, which is what he's done to us. And, that doesn't make for stronger personalities. It actually makes for weaker personalities in the society on both sides of the equation.
I agree. And that's why I was sort of referencing and building on what you said about your past, because I grew up when I was told through so much of the media today, even, that I was prejudiced. Never was.
Mm-hmm.
Never was. And I've been going back and looking at old TV, and I found a show called In the Heat of the Night.
Yeah.
I sew for a living and do custom work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going back and I'm seeing what media told us then and what media versus what media is telling us now. And media says we got a lot of problems. We do have a lot of problems, but it's going back to what Carl Jung said earlier with that opposites and collective conscious.
Yeah.
And again, this is 12-step talk. If you can't communicate, you believe what your tribe tells you.
Yep.
If you're not educated, you believe what your tribe tells you.
Yep.
And so then I spent the other night watching comedy on TV, late night, like Seth Meyers and I can't think what they are. Trevor somebody, and he's not even
Trevor Noah. Yeah.
Right. He's going back to I think Africa, and the company said, "Great, come on back. We're going to be glad to have you." This is an educated man, and he was making fun of the politicians, and that's where somebody was making a comment earlier. Says, "Well, get back to comedy." I said, "It's the only place out there strong enough to tell the blame truth, and I go there versus the news media." And so,
right, and that's what comedy is. After all, comedy is bringing us face to face with our dark side.
And that's what we talked about in Carl Jung. Oh, okay,
sure.
We're on a delay, so I thought you had paused, so I'm sorry.
You thought I had what?
Paused.
Oh, no.
So I don't mean to be interrupting, but anyway, I think what Carl Jung to do is tonight, and we've got some people listening tonight on YouTube. I don't know.
Yes, we do. Yeah, 15 of them.
About what they're seeing in their world and their experience, as we've said, our level, and I'd just love to hear from some of them too, but I'm just going to bring in these things and you build on them, and I will, and I hope they'll give us some comments.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, paragraph 459. Repression of the collective psyche was absolutely necessary for the development of the personality, since collective psychology and personal psychology exclude one another up to a point. History teaches us that whenever a psychological attitude acquires a collective value, schisms begin to break out, which is exactly what we're seeing in our current affairs. Nowhere is this more evident than in the history of religion. A collective attitude is always a threat to the individual, even when it is unnecessary. It is dangerous because it is very apt to check and smother all personal differentiation. It derives this characteristic from the collective psyche, which is itself a product of the psychological differentiation of the powerful gregarious instinct in man. Collective thinking and feeling and collective effort are relatively easy in comparison with individual functioning and performance, and from this may arise all too easily a dangerous threat to the development of personality through enfeeblement of the personal function. The damage done to the personality is compensated, for everything is compensated in psychology by a compulsive union and unconscious identity with the collective psyche. And so we really see this with our former president, where there has been enfeeblement of the personal function. And when you look at the people that were involved in the January 6th event, you say, wow, would I want to have those people running my country? It's really a question. And pardon?
No, go ahead. And when
okay, they're totally dependent upon him, and so he makes himself the tribal chief, and everybody just gives up their personality to that person. Okay, so
when I said where I live, and it's a Christian retreat center.
Yeah.
He says, Trump says he is their leader. Their leader now. And I can say, I think several of them in here do it because I sure don't follow what they believe. And that's where it splits us. And they've had people flying through here with these big old flags and Trump this and taking away certain rights or privileges, or if I don't listen to them, then whatever. And that's where it's more division that I see that he's causing in the nation. And when people are splitting left and right, I think we need to look at us as a nation, what we want as a group collective versus the individuals. And that's where what you said about January 6th, I'm not seeing people speak up at what he did was against our country.
Well, we have to say that we're a society of individuals. We're not a society that depends on one individual. Okay. I mean, this is the part of the society that depends on Donald Trump is a bit foolish, because I've never heard him say that he's doing anything for the average person, nothing whatsoever. It's always about him. And
big business, and other
and big business, which are the people that keep him in office so that he can avoid jail. Go ahead.
Is putting him in business and taking care of themselves. I can say individuals study your tax laws and follow the dollars, and you'll see why we got where we got. We need
exactly.
Yes.
You're right. And I drank the Kool-Aid for a lot of years because I went to Milton Friedman style, all quant, all statistics business school. And they were simply wrong. They created a collective of businessmen who are psychotic. and and the crazy thing is that, yeah, now we have these so many more billionaires. I mean, I think we created something like 700 more billionaires in the 20 teens.
And in the pandemic, how many more?
Yeah, and so we have all these little green electrons running around, but there's no business anymore. People are having problems buying things, so you know, the economy can crash if you don't pay attention to the little guy, because the little guy is the one that has the dream and will, you know, buy the nice automobile and buy the nice sewing machine or you know, refrigerator, what have you.
The old one from way back when in the 50s, because it's metal and it works. Can't afford the electronic ones. I do have one, but this is where it is.
Yep.
And trace where World War II came from. Big business and government, and you're in England.
Yep, that's what happened in Germany, where the industrialists took over the country and promoted Hitler up the ladder, from corporal up to Führer, and they thought they were doing great, but what they did was they crushed their country in the process and got a lot of themselves killed in the end. Okay, because it can't go on. It can't go on indefinitely. It spirals out of control, and then all the crockery gets broken, and then we start over again. And you know who does the starting over again?
Yeah.
Jewel, do you know who starts over again?
Is it the little people?
It's the women.
Well, and okay, this is where I'm going. I'm saying the little people because I never made it in my time. Because back to the group think that I had is I knew that there had to be other people out there that were doing great. There were tremendous Blacks out there doing wonderful, tremendous minorities, but it was businesses who saw, and it's businesses, I'm saying, not race, that saw the problem in our society of what was. And so that's where I think they're trying to bring race wars with us. And I'm saying big business is our enemy, and more than anything else.
Definitely, it's become a real enemy.
And that's where Carl Jung said, the groups that teach us, and these groups are teaching us red or blue, and they're teaching us to their economic theory. The economics today, and I love that in college. I was already an adult with children to take care of, and I would have gone that direction. So I was taking the route accounting, which now I won't go there, but I'll talk to you off screen about that. The big business, that up and getting rid of some small little good paying jobs that would go up the skill, because women were taking the jobs in accounting, and they're taking over. So I'm going to be quiet and let Carl Jung speak again.
Okay, so I'm at 460. There is now a danger that in the analysis of the unconscious, the collective and the personal psyche may be fused together with, as I have intimated, highly unfortunate results. These results are injurious both to the patient's life feeling and to his fellow men, if he has any power at all over his environment. Through his identification with the collective psyche, he will infallibly try to force the demands of his unconscious upon others, for identity with the collective psyche always brings with it a feeling of universal validity, godlikeness, which completely ignores all differences in the psychology of his fellows. Okay, and this is exactly what we see in our former president, who certainly thinks he's godlike and goes around the country with these big rallies. Of course, they don't show how many people are actually at these rallies. That's a big issue. Okay, so.
And I'll say one other thing about that, about that, is his with women, what you talked about earlier, the women will bring it back.
Mhm.
I feel, and this is my bias, I get real upset when I see women driving cars, putting a Trump sign up. I have a young person I said something to him. I said, I wasn't going to be strong as I am tonight. And I said,
Mhm.
I would never vote for Trump because of the way he's treated women. And
Mhm.
this young person was not as knowledgeable as I was. Love him dearly. So I said, and his reply was, well, he's a businessman. And so therefore, I said, he was one of the ones, because of the big businesses supporting him in 208, that caused the problem. And I said, and it was the little people who lost their stuff and still are holding on to some of these things, but it's the banks that own the
Right.
property and did well.
Right. And the banks during the crash in 2008 got themselves paid double. They got paid by their insurance, their credit default swaps, and then they went out and still took everybody's home away from them, even though they had been covered. And
I agree. Yes.
and so they got paid double, and this is how 10 million homes were stolen from the American people. Basically, they harvested our life savings, and I'm one of them. And
Well,
so, yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
saying what's happened. Pandemic. Vote
Yeah,
for your
that too.
women who've not been in office. You've got, I'm neither party. Liz Cheney spoke out against him. How many other women are speaking out against him? How many men are willing to give up their job in Congress?
Well, we're going to see that next week, I think. It's going to be interesting. So the results next Tuesday night, a week from tomorrow, are going to tell us whether we can save the country or whether we're going to have 30 or 40 years of a really horrible time up until when all the crockery is broken again. Then the women will save it. Okay.
Well, and what I'm hoping, one of the things, people learn what their heart tells them to vote. Don't listen to the politicians. Where I'm listening right now, they don't tell me what they want, what they stand for. And some of them stand exactly what I'm against. But
Sure.
they tell me what the other person did wrong. And so I'm wanting to find where they stand. So I choose not the party.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, paragraph 461. The worst abuses of this kind can be avoided by a clear understanding and appreciation of the fact that there are differently oriented psychological types whose psychology cannot be forced into the mold of one's own type. It is hard enough for one type completely to understand another type, but perfect understanding of another individuality is totally impossible. Due regard for the individuality of another is not only advisable, but absolutely essential in analysis of if the development of the patient's personality is not to be stifled. Here it is to be observed that for one type of individual to show respect for another's freedom is to grant him freedom of action, which for another it is to grant him freedom of thought. In analysis, both must be safeguarded as far as the analyst's own self-preservation permits him to do so. An excessive desire to understand and enlighten is just as useless and injurious as a lack of understanding. Okay, that's a cautionary tale for me as a teacher. I can't help enlighten children who refuse to be enlightened. Okay.
Yeah, they have been taught, our school system has been dumbed down. And I think part of it, well, I know it has. I'm not going to say any more. That's a whole thing about education. But I will say that the question that was in the chat, if you could type that in that chat, I don't have that book. I know you held it up a few minutes ago, so that it could be what that book is.
Okay, well, we're almost finished with this book, Jewel, and I'm hoping that we'll go on to something else, but I will type it into the Zoom chat here. It's 2 essays on analytical psychology, and it's volume 7 of the collected works. And so most of these thoughts have been improved upon even by Jung later on. These essays were written in the 19-teens, about 100 years ago, and he's cleaned this up quite a bit over the years. But these fundamental ideas in this essay are quite good. So for paragraph 462, the collective instincts and fundamental forms of thinking and feeling brought to light by analysis of the unconscious constitute for the conscious personality an acquisition which it cannot assimilate completely without injury to itself. I'm going to read that again because I'm not quite sure what he said. The collective instincts and fundamental forms of thinking and feeling brought to light by analysis of the unconscious constitute for the conscious personality an acquisition which it cannot assimilate completely without injury to itself. And then there's a footnote. Here I would pause to remark that I intentionally abstained from discussing the question of how this problem presents itself from the point of view of the psychology of types. A special and somewhat complicated study would be required to formulate this in the language of type psychology. I must content myself here with indicating the difficulties that such a task would involve. The word person, for instance, signifies one thing to the introvert and another to the extrovert. During childhood, the conscious function of adaptation to reality is archaic and collective, but it soon acquires a personal character, which it may maintain henceforth if the individual feels no particular need to develop his type toward the ideal. If such an eventuality arises, the function of adaptation to reality may attain a perfection which pretends to universal validity and therefore bears a collectivistic character as contrasted with its primitive collective character. To pursue this terminology, the collective psyche would be identical with the herd soul in the individual, whereas a collectivistic psychology would represent a highly differentiated attitude to society. Now, in the introvert, the conscious function of adaptation to reality is thinking, which in the early stages of development is personal, but which tends to acquire a general character of a collectivistic nature, while his feeling remains markedly personal insofar it is conscious and collective archaic, insofar as it is unconscious or is repressed. To the extrovert, precisely the reverse happens. Besides this important difference, there is another, and one which is much more profound, between the role and meaning of the person for the extrovert and for the introvert. The whole endeavor of the introvert is directed toward preserving the integrity of his ego, which makes him assume an attitude towards his own personal person entirely different from that of the extrovert, whose adaptation is made through feeling, even at the cost of his own person. These observations show that what extraordinary difficulties we should have to surmount if we wish to consider our problems from the angle of type psychology and justify us in abstaining from the attempt. This theme was greatly developed in psychological types, where the identification of thinking with introversion and feeling with extroversion was given up. It wasn't given up, it was presented. He means it was presented there. And that's the volume before this volume. And so the way to get into this today is to get into the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And, you know, there are a lot of people that'll say that the MBTI is flawed. You know, I don't care what they say. I find it very useful, and I've used it my whole business career to help me understand people. Okay, now there are some comments here which I'll on YouTube, which I'll try to address. Okay, so what Beyond Birth Sanity? You asked what we're reading. We're almost finished with 2 essays on analytical psychology, which is volume 7 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. We've been reading it for close to a year, it seems, and we're going to be finished with it by the first of the year. So Wendigo, how Jung was able to articulate this stuff is a mystery to me. Well, he spent his whole life doing it, and he didn't have television or radio, so he didn't have diversions like we have today. No televised soccer games or football games or any other such thing. The book, okay, thanks, JDS. An introvert thinking can become stinking. Well, yes, but it's also a very interesting life. Or an introverted intuitive is a very interesting life, but it can become stinking. There's no doubt. But anyway, Wendigo, I'm assuming Jung was fairly introverted. Anyone that well-read must be, right? Yes, and I agree with that. He certainly was an introverted, intuitive thinker, although he was close to on the feeling side, I think. All right, let's go on here. So I stopped at footnote 8, but there's more to this paragraph. It is therefore the utmost importance in practical treatment to keep the goal of the individual's development constantly in view. Okay, so his predilection was always to create an individual, to be free to be an individual, and to understand what that means, even if it violated moral laws. And he lived in a menage a trois for 40 years and never hit it. And he had his reasons. Not all of us can get away with that, but he did. So, for if the collective psyche is taken to be the personal possession of the individual or as a personal burden, it will result in a distortion or an overloading of the personality, which is very difficult to deal with. Okay, so we certainly see that in our former presidents. Hence, it is imperative to make a clear distinction between the personal unconscious and the contents of the collective psyche. This intention is far from easy because the personal grows out of the collective psyche and is intimately bound up with it. So it is difficult to say exactly what contents are to be called personal and what collective. There is no doubt, for instance, that archaic symbolisms, such as we frequently find in fantasies and dreams, are collective factors. All basic instincts and basic forms of thinking and feeling are collective. Everything that all men agree in regarding as universal is collective. Likewise, everything that is universally understood, universally found, universally said and done. On closer examination, one is always astonished to see how much of our so-called individual psychology is really collective. So much, indeed, that the individual traits are completely overshadowed by it. Since, however, individuation is an ineluctable psychological necessity, we can see from the ascendancy of the collective that very special attention must be paid to this delicate plant individuality if it is not to be completely smothered. Okay, so what smothers individuality? Well, everybody gets a trophy. That doesn't. So mothers in the 80s and 90s were all making sure that everybody gets a trophy in the youth soccer league. And so there wasn't any chance for anybody to break out of the collective and be unique as a hero. There's a common experience. I won't say how many times I was sent to the principal's office, but many people, obviously, in our society have, done some misdemeanor in school. Well, what is the purpose of quote unquote punishment on that misdemeanor? The purpose of the quote unquote punishment, which might be as bad as making you sit in the principal's office for 30 minutes or something like that. The purpose of it is to help you understand what civilization is and what it isn't. And so it's not done to hurt you, it's done to educate you. But here's the thing. Everybody has had some misdemeanor in their life and been punished for it. And so when our former president comes into power and says, well, I don't have to do that. Well, the reaction of the collective psyche is, yes, okay, because you were so angry about that so-called punishment back when you were a child that that stuck with you. And so the fact that he can flout convention and flout the law is kind of revenge for a lot of people. And go ahead.
I want to say that's where I'm saying things about politics, because Carl Jung brought these up, or not politics, but because of our time, which is, November tomorrow in 2022, our election year. And that's when I'm looking at the collective and the group. The collective is that, I'm going to say red or blue, or if it's Christian or Islam or whatever, Jewism, black, white, that's collective. Individual is myself, as I said earlier. And I'm looking at the issues right now. And Biden did one, and that was to me, with the collective thing coming up, with the way politics took it. And that was, we're going to forego student debt. Now, I'm going to tell you, some of those people out there paying it were not Harvard grads. Right. Some of those kids were my kids.
Yep.
Who put themselves in school in 80 and now who have degrees and are working and supporting. So to me, why not put a cap on it? So that's where it's our politicians, and still they quit playing politics. They're not going to vote red or white, but at least I'm choosing. The other thing, I've got people, grew up farmers, got some would never shoot a gun. I got others that are out in the country, will only kill something if they're hunting, because there's so many deer rampant where they are. But I went down the road today and there's a sign, you going to take my gun away? No, vote Republican. Well, guess what? That Republican's going to tell a woman she can't have an abortion, or a Democrat's going to say that. So that's what they're making my health rights family's decisions, which is an individual man, that affects him if he has to pay child support. One of the things and now women are paying it. This goes back to taxes a long time ago. Told somebody a thing today. I said I was substituting in a college class one day, and of course it was a business law or something like that, taxes. And everybody came in real cocky after these ball games, winning this. And I said, I'm going to tell y'all something. We're going to take a minute here. I want to show you what this good time may have cost you last night. Pretend saying we had $100 in the money. I said, you got $100 in your paycheck this week. Do you know how much your Uncle Sam wants from you? You don't get a choice. And then I said, you know what your state wants from you? You don't get a choice. You know how much Social Security wants from you? You don't get a choice. You know how much sales tax wants for you? You don't get a choice. And do you know how much you're going to pay for child support? You don't get a choice on this base. But what they did during the 80s, and I lived in this in public housing, that's when, for me to be able living in the military, we didn't have enough money to live. So we went and lived in public housing, 2 of the largest units in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the city of that capital up there in that city, 2 white families. It's the best place I ever lived, the best housing, the best plan. On one side was the Capitol. They drove Rolls Royces. Behind me was a grocery store, had a swimming pool. We had laundromats, but those people were taught they weren't good. They were taught they could be given. Women were taught, you got kids, you're going to get more money. You're going to get more money. You're going to get more money. I did not even have a high school education then. I went to the school right beside me, finished it was 1 year I needed, finished that. Now I've got my bachelor's. Now I don't want any more education from these institutions because they keep raising the bar, as I said earlier. But I did find out that if I really want to learn something in business, I'm going to learn tax law. And now the accountants are going to be, if they want to have to, you can still, addition is addition, subtraction. You just got to know what number to put it on the line. I even made a whole class do theirs. The ones that weren't scared. What? It's that simple? The government could do our taxes for us, and that's where the accounting firms are going in. They are buying up the rights to our financial information because the government now sponsors these companies by saying, go to the IRS, we're going to tell you where you can go free, and they got all your tax information.
Right. And now they want to, in addition to having that, they want to take away your Social Security and take away your Medicare that you've been paying for. In my case, I've been paying for these things for over 60 years.
This is where economics comes in, and that goes back to my love of my education. And most of it has been out of school, and that's my individual right. And when that I'll say that one about stinking thinking, that's when I follow the people who don't let me think right, and I go crazy. And that was a January 6th.
Yep.
And Trump thinks he's king.
And Trump what?
Thinks he's king or God or whoever he is.
Yeah, well, he definitely has a megalomania thing going. Okay, paragraph 463. Human beings have one faculty which, though it is of the greatest utility for collective purposes, is most pernicious for individuation, and that is the faculty of imitation. Collective psychology cannot dispense with imitation, for without it, all mass organizations, the state and the social order, are simply impossible. Society is organized indeed less by law than by the propensity to imitation, implying equally suggestibility, suggestion, and mental contagion. But we see every day how people use, or rather abuse, the mechanism of imitation for the purpose of personal differentiation. They are content to ape some eminent personality, some striking characteristic or mode of behavior, thereby achieving an outward distinction from the circle in which they move. We could almost say that as a punishment for this uniformity of their minds with those of their neighbors, already real enough, is still further increased until it becomes an unconscious enslavement to their surroundings. As a rule, these specious attempts at differentiation stiffen into a pose, and the imitator remains at the same level as he always was, only several degrees more sterile than before. To find out what is truly individual in ourselves, profound reflection is needed, and suddenly we realize how uncommonly difficult the discovery of individuality is. Okay, that's the end of that reading. Did you want to comment on that, Jewel?
No, I just appreciate you by reading to us.
Mm-hmm.
You introduced me to Carl Jung. I'm now reading the books. I can now can share my experience with passion tonight.
Yeah, that's great.
And I can share my learned experiences through the economics. And we do need our educational institutions, but we need the individuals to stand up. And for me, where I learned living in a Christian community, my rights as a property owner have been denied.
Right.
And this reading tells me tonight that that institution has its problem. And
yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's the same with me, and I had the good education, and it's because the powers that be get us to believe things that are not true. And so all these guys that are running around with MAGA hats, you think they're individual? Goodness gracious, those are not individualists. Those are guys that want to wear a uniform. And, you know, occasionally I do wear my Marine Corps uniform. If it's November 10th and I'm doing a session, I will wear my dress blues because that's the birthday of the Marine Corps. And everybody should know that the way to win the heart of a Marine, including me, is by wishing me happy birthday on November 10th. It's a long tradition in our Corps. And, you know, when you're in the military, you are a collective person. But I don't need to prove myself by putting my uniform on and making myself a collective person, which is what that does. And so I'm very happy to have served because, you know, we don't leave anybody behind. The Marine Corps doesn't leave people behind. And so if ever I have to be in combat again, I always want a Marine by my side because I know that they will make sure I get home, dead or alive. And
yeah, I want to cry with that one.
Yeah, I know that.
My cousin, who was went into the Marines, his dad was a military lifer, and he was killed in the first Beirut bombing.
Oh boy!
And I knew it before it happened. I don't know what happened that day. You talk about synchronicity and stuff, and I said something's happened horrible today, and so my uncle told me, he said, of all the places in the world, I thought he'd be safe. At that point in time, he thought he would be safe.
Right.
But also, I will say, I said, what was your worst experience in the military? And he said, I had to give my orders to my men. And some of them, because they were asked to do things that were hard. They gave him a hard time, and but he was only doing his responsibility. So I'm wondering, what's our military? Are they taking care of us, or are they taking care of big oil and the big businesses without doing the right things? And you can only address that. I can't.
Well, that's a really big question. And I don't know if you've heard recently about this podcast that Rachel Maddow has done about Ultra, but it relates to how there was a push to overthrow the government of the United States once before in the 1930s, and it was led among others Charles Lindbergh, but they tried to recruit Smedley Butler, who was touted to be Commandant of the Marine Corps. He was a 2-star general, I think, Major General. And this group wanted him to be the military leader and take over and do a coup d'etat, and he refused to do that. And so the result of that is, among other things, that one of our 3 major Marine Corps bases in the world is Camp Smedley Butler, which is in Okinawa, because a third of the Marine Corps is still, believe it or not, stationed in Japan, in both Okinawa and mainland Japan. So the 3rd Marine Division is headquartered in Okinawa, and the 3rd Marine Air Wing is headquartered in Iwakuni, Japan. But in Okinawa, that's on Camp Smedley Butler, and it's named after him. But he wrote a book about that he was an enforcer for big business at some point. It's worth looking up. I forget the name of it exactly, but look up Smedley, Smedley, and Butler, Butler. I think he wrote a couple of books about this stuff, and he's one of our heroes in the Marine Corps because he stood up for our country and our Constitution at a time when some very dastardly men were trying to overthrow the government back in the 30s, and we have that happening right now.
Exactly, and that's where I appreciate this.
Yeah. So, pardon?
Thank you so much.
Yep. So thank you so much for being here, because that pushed me along, and I would have ended this earlier had it not been for you and for discussing this. And thank you to our audience for sticking with us and offering some comments as well that kept us going tonight.
And I would like to add to one of that. Wendigo said, catch a fish too big for the boat, you have to throw it back. Well, we got a big fish, someone who was in the White House, and I want him thrown back. And my tax professor, you know how I'm talking about business tonight, I loved what he said. Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. So I thought very much said with very little words.
Yep, that's right.
I hope our big businesses get thrown out of the boat and small businesses come back into business, come to life.
Well, in fact, that is what happens, because I noted in a little business that I was in that, when I started in it, there were probably 150 companies in it. And then by the year 2000, the biggest company in the industry had swallowed all these little companies up, and there were only about maybe 8 or 10 left at that point. And yet then the 8 or 10 found business niches that the big guys were missing. And ultimately, 5 years after that, my company bought that company, the biggest company in the industry. And so, turnabout is fair play. And it's amazing. I think in 2002, I wanted to sell our company to that company for $5 million, and they refused. And in 2005, 3 years later, we bought that company for $285 million.
Well, and that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. This is
Right. That's exactly right.
Well, and I want to say one other thing about that. Dang it, it just left my brain. It'll pop back in, but it's along this same line of big. Oh, COVID. Harvard University did return their millions that they got. And those were the people that perhaps these people were talking about with the debt. I don't think those people that went there that can support this kind of school on a day-to-day basis, the institutions where they go to school to just get the networking done there.
Sure.
That's what they're doing, is getting the networking done. As a small business owner set up as a sole proprietor, I was denied the money from any COVID during all that time, and people were getting $600 a week.
Oh, yeah.
As an individual.
Right.
If I'd been set up as a corporation, I could be maybe a millionaire now.
Could be. I mean, all those things just keep happening.
And your not-for-profits got them too, which I'm saying that because of religion.
Yeah. But I am thankful for the fact that we do have vaccines for COVID now, and it was developed very quickly. And especially now when I'm going into the schools where I'm meeting 100 kids a day from 100 different families, and obviously they're exposed to another 5 people each, so 500 people worth of exposure every single day when you go to school. I'm very grateful that I have a vaccine in me that's protecting me, and it's protecting my wife, and it's protecting my 92-year-old mother-in-law.
And there's a comment about a perfect mustache. Yeah,
this is the perfect mustache. Sorry for this meta commentary, but it is a truth. Well, thank you so much. I'm still cultivating it. I almost shaved it off after my acting debut after 58 years in June, where I played Carl Jung, and you can find that play on this YouTube channel. It's right on top. We decided the other night not to redo it because it was perfect that time through. And so meanwhile, beyond birth sanity, what was Jung's MBTI? Okay, what was Jung's MBTI? It was INT. It must have been INTJ, but it was sort of wobbling toward the P also. I say J because he was very fastidious about sticking to his knitting throughout his life. And from the time he wrote the Red Book on, he was high diddle right down the middle in terms of what he saw that his role was in the human species and what he was going to do, and he did it. And boy, I don't know many people that can say that about their lives, that they saw what they should do when they were 30 and just did it perfectly right down the middle. There are few, but they're few and far between. So anyway, thank you, Joel. I'm going to I'm going to move on here because I have a gig tomorrow. So
Okay. Thank you.
We'll see you next week. Take care now. Peace.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone. Peace.